Hello everyone and welcome to Blue Tengu's live game development show, where we show everything that goes into making a game from concept to completion. If you've ever wanted to make a game, we hope this will help lower the barrier to entry, maybe give you the nudge you needed to try it yourself. Even if you didn't want to make a game, we hope you'll find some value in what we're doing here just as entertainment. All of the information about where you can find us is in the Twitch info down below, or in our YouTube profile for those of you who are catching us later. But just in case, we're at www.bluetengu.com, btengu on Twitter, facebook.com, Blue Tengu Studio, all one word, youtube.com, Blue Tengu Studio, for those of you who are watching the live stream, and Twitch TV Blue Tengu for those of you who are watching us later on YouTube. If you missed the last couple of episodes, you can catch them over at YouTube, but you shouldn't have any trouble following along even if you haven't seen them. For those of you who haven't seen the show on Twitch or YouTube before, my name's Eric. I'm a game designer living in Japan who's trying to show you everything that goes into making a game for about 2 hours a week, including all of the ums and ahs and awkward debugging moments. The reason I'm showing it all, as opposed to making the game first and scripting out a rehearsed tutorial, is because I want to lower the barrier people feel about making a game, and I hope inspire you to go out and try it yourself. Thank you to Jamorian and everyone who dropped by last week, and to those of you who watched us on YouTube. For those of you here with me right now on Twitch, feel free to drop suggestions or ask questions at any time in the chat. I may not be able to answer them right away because I'll be working in the background, but I'll try to get to them. And if I can't, please send me a private message here or leave a comment on our site or YouTube. I'll do my best to address it next time. If any of you are out there making something and you don't mind showing it off, send me a link to your stuff. I'd love to see it. Anyway, at this time, every week for 2 hours, I come on Twitch TV to work on the game Project Spaghetti, a top-down 2D cowboy shooter, where the bullets fired bounce around the screen with a pinball mechanic. Last week, the plan was to get the bad guys shooting, but the plans changed when the bullet pickups proved to be more of a challenge than expected. So instead, I added the pickups to the game and gave the player the ability to dodge bullets as they whiz by. The reason that getting the enemy shooting is going to take a good chunk of time is that I originally designed the bullets to be influenced by the player's direction and movement, but that's obviously not going to work if I'm going to have bad guys shooting them too. So this won't be much of a game if only the player can shoot, so that needs to get fixed. I suspect getting the enemy shooting will take the whole episode, but if I have a few spare minutes at the end, I'll also try to set up, just a basic win condition where the player will, win once all the enemies are dead. So let's head on over to Trello.com where I keep my task list and have a look at what we need to do here. Jump to the desktop and jump on over to here. So, Clip, who showed up a couple of episodes back, is back in the chat. He mentions, or he or she, I'm not sure actually, that have the company hat. Yes, I do. I think I did have it the first episode, but the camera was so zoomed in on my face that it was like, I kind of had a hat, but you couldn't really see it. So I think you can see it now. Anyway, over at Trello.com, which any of you guys can see, by the way, if you just follow the link. Did I put it down in the Twitch feed? I may need to put it down in the Twitch FAQ somewhere, but it's Trello.com, and I think if you search for Project Spaghetti, it should show up, but the link is on the website if you go to www.bluetengu.com, and let's see, if you go to Games Project Spaghetti, it should be just right there, the link, and if you're watching this on YouTube, I usually put up an annotation that shows where it is. So, jumping back to last episode, episode 6, the things I did was, let's see, I fixed the collision for the side of the screen so that the bullets didn't, cross over it when they were going too fast. I added the pickup bullet spray, just a rough sprite, a little power-up icon. It's a little blue circle with a bullet in the middle. And I also have, the bad cowboys, when you shoot them, they leave a bullet behind so you can pick more up and kind of resupply. And also, I did add the player action dodge mechanic. The graphics very rough, but I just basically shrank him down to about half the size for, I believe it was about a second or so. And it takes a little bit of time for him to duck, so the player can't Well, actually, no, I didn't do it that way. I did have it where you just hit space and the player just ducks right away. But the problem is, I don't want the player to be able to duck every time that they hit the space bar, so what I did was I had a little cooldown so that when they hit space, they duck, and then they pop up, but before they can duck again, they're popped up, so if they time it wrong, they'll get hit by the bullet, obviously to create a little bit of a rock, paper, scissors action on using the dodge mechanic. So that was last week, and one of the things I originally had planned for last week, not knowing it would be a little tougher than I expected, was the having the bad cowboys actually shoot at the player, to make this more of a game, obviously. So that's going to be a big task. I did set it at 2 hours, so it may take the whole episode. I did look up something on Game Maker, so maybe it won't take the whole 2 hours, but we'll see. If I do get done early, I'll do just the win condition, which is if you kill all the enemies, you win. So that's enough of that. Jumping on over to Game Maker. Probably the first thing I should show is where the game is right now. So jumping into Project Spaghetti. Those are all our sprites, our backgrounds, our global variable script, all the objects we have, and then our 2 rooms. So hitting play. So right now, basic setup. The bad guys don't move or anything because that's going to happen later after they start shooting. But do have bullets bouncing around, and with enough bounces the bullets start to speed up. They also start to be worth more points when they do hit a bad guy. And I've got pickups that appear and resupply me with bullets if I don't have 6. So as you can see there, the bullet sped up. It was worth more points when it hit the bad guy. And obviously right now, there's my duck mechanic, by the way. Ducked, popped up, got hit by the bullet. So there is a little bit of a drawback to using that dodge mechanic just whenever. And as you can see, I killed all the enemies, but nothing happens. So that's that thing, the win condition that I want to set up. So the first thing is to have these bad guys actually shoot. I have to modify the bullet object, because right now the bullet object in its creation is referencing the player direction, which is fine for the bullets that the player shoots, but the problem is if the enemy shoots the bullet, then the player direction is obviously not important for the bullet. So what I need to do is move all of this logic out of the bullet object and put it into the player object and the enemy object. So that's going to take a little bit of time. Hopefully I don't mess things up. I actually should back up my project here. Yeah, that's fine. I don't think I changed anything, but it probably wants to remember the windows or something. So I am going to just back up my project just in case I screw things up. At least I can get back to where I was, because I don't use like a SVN or any source repositories. And RuneClip mentions, why not just set the enemies to shoot at the player's XY coordinates? That's probably what I will do in the beginning. I'll probably set up a couple of different enemies in the end, but the very basic enemy is going to shoot at where the player at least was when the enemy first shot. The thing about that is it's probably going to be pretty easy to dodge those bullets, so that'll be the basic enemy, and then probably a more complicated enemy will be one that tries to anticipate where the player is going by taking whatever their horizontal and vertical speed is and trying to anticipate where the player is going to be. So the player has to work a little bit harder to dodge the enemy bullets. But the first one I will do is the one that RuneClip mentions, which is shooting right where the player is, because that's going to be the easiest enemy to do first. So to do this, I do have to pull this logic out of here. All of these like player directions, I think I had it set up as a clock, so like I think 0 was 12 o'clock, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 8 directions basically that the player can be facing. So I need to pull this out of bullet and put it into the player when the bullet gets created. It's kind of scary just cutting all of that. So I think for now I'm going to leave it behind, but I have to remember to come back and delete it, otherwise things are going to be kind of crazy. So I will just copy it, I guess, and come on over to player. So the player shoots when they hit control, creates an instance of object bullet, obviously cuts the number of bullets in the player's inventory down by 1. I have an alarm in here, which is the reload thing. So I think what I will do is, let's see, should I just do a script? Let's see if I can get away with using the GameMaker GUI first. So pasting all of that in just as is. Since, let's see, since I don't want this applying to the player, obviously, I don't want to set the player to be like ricocheting around the screen or jumping off like a bullet. I am going to go with object and bullet. And I'm not sure if it's going to be able to see this variable or not. GameMaker might handle this for me, because this BL current speed is a variable that's inside the bullet object. We'll see. So I do need to change all of these to the bullet. And hope for the best. Obviously, using the GUI to replace variables is not one of the more exciting aspects of game development, but stick with me. It shouldn't take too long. And I'll try to pay attention so I don't make a mistake that causes me to jump into some debugging hassles. GameMaker's GUI is definitely nice for some things, but for quick and dirty replacement of things, obviously that niceness becomes kind of an obstruction. And of course, everything that you do in GameMaker you can also do in script, and in some cases I have been doing that, especially in cases where the GUI can't handle stuff. But I try to keep it as visual as possible because that's supposedly, you know, GameMaker's big strong point. So let's see, that should theoretically have the player direction setting the bullet's horizontal speed, vertical speed, and position. Now we just have to see if it actually does it. I do need to get rid of this stuff here. And hopefully this just works. If it did, that would be awesome. I suspect it won't, but it would be nice if it does. It does work. Well, that is very nice. That is very, very nice. For some reason I'm shooting out 2 bullets though, because I'm probably creating an instance of something. Let's see what happens. Let me try that again. So I'm probably accidentally creating 2 bullets. The one that goes to the right seems to be alright. Yeah, that's very weird. Okay, let's see if I can figure out exactly what's going on here. It seems to be that I'm creating 2 bullets. No. It's something to do with when they are switching around, so maybe when they turn blue, I get 2 bullets out of it. Seems to work all right in the beginning, but then when I pick up a bullet pickup, maybe it's screwing up. Yeah, that seems to be fine. It's definitely a mystery. See, there we go. It did create like suddenly 3 bullets. So that's very weird. It might be due to that alarm thing. It might be due to this. Control, let's see. So it is creating an instance of object bullet just once. PL shoots set to 1. I think it is something when I run out of bullets that's causing it to screw up. Let me move that up here. Let's see if that fixes it first before I go off and explain why that will fix it. Because if it doesn't fix it, there's no point in explaining why that fixed anything. Okay, that's obviously no good as well. I think now I know what's happening. It wasn't that. I think that was actually fine as it was. So let's put that back here. I think what is happening is when I'm doing this, it's setting the speed horizontal for all of the bullets in the game, which is not what we want. So I do need to do this in script, apparently. So to do that, I did have some notes. Here, for example, I did look around to see exactly how people were doing this. So I think what I need to do, because in this case, with these notes, the bullet is equal to this particular instance of the bullet. So then when I say bullet H speed, bullet B speed, it's not changing the horizontal and vertical speed for all of the bullets, it's just changing it for that one. And that's exactly what I want. So in this case, Game Maker's GUI, not up to the task of what I wanted it to do, unfortunately. So I do have to make a script in there. So let's see, that's all in control. So instead of all of this player direction equals blah blah blah, I'm going to need a script that does all of the same stuff. So let's put that in. Copy and paste, my notes that I found online. And let's see, PL direction is equal to 7. Unfortunately, because this is all GUI, I can't copy and paste this into the script, which is unfortunate. Let's see, is it edit? It's not letting me edit the script. Oh, it's just minimized. Okay. Okay, well, let's see. Bullet equals instance create player dot x. This all actually depends on the player stuff too, so it's not quite like the example I found, because it needs to work with my game here, as opposed to whatever the person who had the solutions game is like. Because I suspect what their game was like was a space shooter where it doesn't matter where the bullet appears in the sprite because it appears below. But in this case, the player has a gun, so the bullet does have to actually look like it's coming from the gun at some point. So it's a little different. So also it's not just right, left, up, and down. There's 8 directions, so I need to fix that. So just to keep it the same as what I have in the GUI, I'm just going to go with, actually, I do need to check Game Maker's comparison operator. Because depending on the programming language, sometimes if it's like Visual Basic or something, the equal sign does everything. If it's a little more of a a strict language like C++, you have to differentiate, like equal always assigns something, and you have to use two equals if you want to compare. I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing here. Yeah. Okay, it looks like in GameMaker's case, it's more like, something like basic where the equal sign does double duty. So I'm fine with just using one equal sign here. So if the player direction is 7, which is exactly what we're doing in the GUI thing, then, I need to create a bullet at this, basically. So I need to copy that. Unfortunately, that tooltip's going to disappear on me when I need it. Where did it go? So that's the X. Let's just copy that, see if that works. Yep, okay, that's the X. So I definitely don't want to type that out because I will make mistakes if I do that. And that's the Y. And I am creating a bullet object. It is called bullet, so that happens to be just fine. And the H speed, let's see, the H speed is that. And in this case, I think I do need to actually have it looking like that. And I also need to do V speed, which is a little different from the example. Now I just need to do that 8 times, unfortunately. Like I said, making this fix is probably something that would take the entire episode because of all these little things. And I'm sure, it's not going to work right off the bat. I'm sure I'll make some mistake somewhere. Horizontal speed is 0. That one is bullet speed. Actually, to make sure I'm doing everything in the right order. Not a fan of the way the GUI jumps around on me because that could be a source of mistakes as well. Okay, so that's already player X. Player Y is the one I need to change. Horizontal speed is 0. Vertical speed is going up. So horizontal speed is 0, that's fine. Vertical speed needs to be this. Also, I'm not entirely sure if GameMaker needs these semicolons, but it doesn't seem to care if they're there, so just for my comfort, I'm probably going to put them in. Because if you're using C++ and you forget one of these things, it causes a lot of problems. Okay, next up is 1. And setting the X. Setting the Y. Adding in my security blanket of a semicolon. And checking the vertical. Yeah, wow, I do not like the way this GUI keeps jumping around all over the place. That is really annoying. Because it's kind of scary, because if I accidentally jump, just right there, if PL direction is equal to 1, when I jump back to the GUI, suddenly it was, I was in the 6th section. So it's like, that's, it's kind of scary, because if I copy the wrong value, then I'm going to drive myself nuts trying to figure out which of these things is causing the problem. If it was a little less complicated, I might just, put all these values in by hand, recalculate, am I going up, down, left, or right? But it is a little bit more complicated than that, so I don't want to do it by hand. But I think what I will do, just to be safe, is I will, once I'm done writing the script out, I will just kind of look it over, making sure that, for player direction 0, which is up, these things make sense. Because I don't want to debug this later. I would rather debug it while it's fresh in my mind. So the next one is player direction 6. Okay. Not sure why I have this order. I can always fix it in the script by copying and pasting, but I'll just stick to the order so I know what I'm doing. There again, we jump to some random value, which is not very fun. I'll just remember that y is player y. Save me at least one step. And I'll add in the semicolons later as well. Ah, that is so annoying. The way it jumps around is so annoying. Okay, vertical speed is just 0, so I'll just type that in. Yeah, I don't understand why it does that at all. Player X, I'll just remember that one. This is for bullet equals instance create. Player X was just player X, and then Y is this crazy thing, and then I'm creating a bullet. Let's see what random place it takes me to now. Okay, horizontal speed is 0, vertical speed is just positive. Let me copy and paste this so I at least save a couple of typing steps. Next is 2, which is going to have this and player Y. That's fine. Okay, let's see what the horizontal speed is. That is just bullet current speed. Vertical is 0. Okay, another copy paste. Getting there. 5. So for 5, it's going to be one of the diagonals, so both of these have to be a crazy thing. So vertical speed, this one. Okay, that's going to be one of the diagonal bullets, so it needs 2 offsets. And horizontal speed is just minus. Vertical speed is positive, so I'll just remember that. Number 3. 3 is obviously another diagonal. And obviously all the speeds are going to be different. This is a positive. That's also a positive, so both of these are going to be positive. That was a good one to copy-paste because there's not as much to change. And let's see, the last... Nope, I guess that's it. Let me check, make sure I have 8 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, whoop. Oh yeah, because I copied and pasted. Good thing I checked. I also need to set this up probably to be an if-else-if thing. I mean, I don't really need to because that's exactly the way I had it in the GUI, but just to be safe, I think I will do that. So let's see. Let's just double check that I've got everything typed in right. So for the position, player X minus the offset, player Y minus the offset. Yep. And horizontal speed is minus, vertical speed is minus, that's fine. Again, this is probably not very exciting step of the game development process, but it's an important one to make sure that I don't have to come back here and spend like an hour trying to figure out what went wrong. This one is player X and player Y minus the offset, that's fine. Bullet horizontal speed 0, vertical speed is minus, that's fine. This one is just player X plus the offset, player Y minus the offset. Yep, that's fine. For player direction 1, horizontal speed is positive, vertical speed is negative. Okay, that's fine. For number 6, it's player X minus the offset. Yep, and just player Y for the Y, which is fine. Horizontal speed's minus, vertical speed is 0. That one's fine. For direction 4, player X is just player X. Player Y is player Y plus the offset, which is fine. Horizontal speed 0 because he's shooting straight down. And the vertical speed is a positive because he's shooting straight down. Player direction 2. Let's see, that is player X plus the offset and just player Y, which is fine. Horizontal speed's positive, vertical speed is 0, that's fine. And player direction 5, player X minus the offset, player Y plus the offset. Horizontal speed is negative, vertical speed is positive. And for the last one, player direction 3, player X plus the offset, player Y plus the offset. Horizontal is positive, vertical is positive. So at least I copied everything right, which is a good sign. So theoretically now I should be able to get rid of all of this. Make sure I get rid of the right stuff. Looks like I can get rid of down to here. And it looks a lot cleaner too. I do also want to make sure that this if is the proper way to form an if in GameMaker as well. So I'm going to look at what I did for another if. Let's see, what is one of the ones that I used a script on? Let me check around. This might be one. Nope. Step. Might have been bullet that I used a script on before. Okay. So in this case I'm using if and then curly brackets and else ifs and stuff like that. I like this style a lot better. I'm not sure if the other one actually works in GameMaker or not, but I'm just going to emulate this. So all of that is in here, and I'm going to throw in those curly brackets. And I'll even throw in the else ifs. Because theoretically the player direction can only be one of these. So if I can get away with else ifs, it's a better way to go. You know, back in the day, it was a big deal to, you know, keep your logic as streamlined as possible. Nowadays, with modern computers, you know, it makes programmers lazy because modern computers can do so much that, you know, fixing or making logic more efficient Not usually worth the time. But, you know, theoretically, it's more efficient to use else ifs, because the way it works is if it finds one of these, if these are all else ifs, you know, theoretically, if it was player direction 7, for example, it would go into here, do all this, and then skip all of these other, you know, checks. It wouldn't even bother checking if player direction is 5 or 3 or whatever, because those are else ifs, and it already went into this if. So, you know, it saves a little bit, I suppose. Probably doesn't matter very much on modern computers, because it's going to be like graphics and things like that that take up all of the processing power anyway. Usually code's not going to make a big deal unless it's something that's really executed a ton of times. So theoretically, this should work. It should be creating these bullet instances and giving them speed. So I don't need this anymore. Let's see what happens. Check the compile window for an error. Cannot set a constant to a value. What am I doing wrong there? Set a constant to a value. Object player, line 15. That's no good. So let's jump in here. Line 15. Okay, I see what's going on here. It's just the naming. Because bullet is actually already an object name, so thought I could get away with making it easier to read, but could not. So what it was trying to do was, you know, access the bullet. I guess you would call it a class. Like, even though it's in this list of objects, the bullet object is in that list of objects, you know, as it is until it becomes an instance. It's just a class. So what I was basically doing here with using bullet dot whatever was I was trying to set the variable for that class as opposed to the object that I created, which is this instance. That's all that's going on there. That's why, you know, it told me, look, buddy, you're trying to fiddle with a constant. And actually, you know, because it's a constant, I probably could get away with just leaving these. The right side of the equation is bullet, but you know, I'm just going to change them all to bullet instance, because the right side, theoretically, you know, I only have one bullet class, so you know, this BL current speed is going to be the same no matter what instance it is. Probably wouldn't give me an error, but you know, I don't feel too safe leaving it behind. One thing about 8 directions is there's a lot of things to change, but thankfully now that it's in script, it's a lot easier to change these things than when they were in the GUI. You know, if I was really pressed for time, I could have done a search and replace, but you know, I do have, this actually does have to be bullet because this is creating an object of this type, so that actually has to stay bullet. And let me put in my semicolons to be safe here. I don't think it matters at all, but you know, just to be safe. So that should theoretically work anyway. Let me just save this before jumping in. Okay, that did work. Now to see if it actually, the game part of it works. No. Okay, so let's see. The thing it is having trouble getting is the BLX offset. BLX offset. Okay, I probably need to put bullet instance in front of those as well. So I do need, let's see, bullet instance dot in front of all of these BLX offsets because they're not variables inside of player, they're variables inside of the bullet. And in this case, because bullet instance doesn't exist yet, I think I do actually have to go with just bullet dot. We'll see what happens. So anywhere I have one of those bullet offset things, I do have to put in this bullet dot. Hopefully it works. Because otherwise I'm going to have to put this bullet offset variable inside of player, and that's all right, I suppose, because that may actually be correct. Because if the enemies weren't the same size as the player, I would have to change the offset based on the size of the sprite. Like if I had an enemy that was twice as big as the player, you know, using this one variable may not be sufficient. So if this doesn't work, I think I will just actually go ahead and make that fix. I don't think I'm going to have enemies that are different sized. Let's see, execution. Yeah, that doesn't look like it's working. So I think I will do that. BL X offset. Yeah, it doesn't like pulling variables out of this class. So where is it? BL X offset to 6 and 11. I'm going to move that over into player. So now BLX offset variables are inside of the player. So, you know, if I do this script for an enemy, for example, I could probably just, you know, change these two values inside of the enemy object and it'd work fine. And actually, I do need to get rid of them from here. In this case, you know, because all of this is taking place within the player, I don't need to change this to player dot per se. But just for clarity, you know, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever if I just say BLX offset or player dot BLX offset. But just so I know exactly where this variable is, you know, at first glance when I'm looking at the script. Let me just make sure that the only bullets I have are these ones. And it looks like that is the case. So that's fine. That's fine. Hopefully this works. We'll find out. Okay, that works fine. And the offset is correct. And hopefully now I don't have that problem where, you know, I have like 6 bullets spawning for no reason. Yep, looks like everything's working just fine. As far as I can tell. Yeah, and I got game over. So, alright, that's good. We've moved, you know, all of that bullet logic out, or the bullet direction logic, we've moved it out of the bullet object and we've put it into the player. So now the next step will be to have enemies shooting, and to do that they're going to have to do the same thing that the player was doing. except the only difference is, the player shoots when I hit the control key. The enemies have to shoot when something's triggered. There's different things I could do. I could do, for example, a timer. I could make it every 5 seconds or something the enemy shoots a bullet at where the player was. I could have it where if they have a clear line of sight to the player they shoot, or I could just make it random. Different things I could do. The easiest thing to do is just going to have them shoot every couple of seconds, but yeah, then all those enemies that are on the screen at the same time. I suppose if I spawn them at different times, it'll be fine. They'll be offset and shooting at different times. But for right now, all those enemies are starting on the screen, so they will all shoot at the exact same time, and that's going to be really, really weird. I wonder if the GUI actually has a random thing in here. I don't think it does. Nope, that looks like a random thing. It's a dice, anyway. Test chance. What is that? Just out of curiosity, let's see what it is. Interesting. With chance 1 out of 2. Oh, okay. Well, that's kind of what I want, I suppose. Maybe. Let's see. Do I want just an odds thing? Yeah, I suppose. I could have it every 3 seconds or 2 seconds. Have a 50-50 chance of them shooting. Yeah, no, that's not quite what I want. Because still, every 5 seconds, a couple of them will be shooting at the same time. That's not quite what I want, I think. Let's see, what's this? Test instance count. That's just for counting, like, how many bullets I have on the screen or whatever. So it doesn't look like the GUI is going to give me the random generator that I want. So let's head on off to... Actually, I think I already did random variables, didn't I? Let's see, I did it with the bullet drops, didn't I? And all of that was in system? Yes, okay, I already did use randoms before. So I'm just going to do this again. iRandom range, that's exactly what I want to do. And I want to do it inside of the bad cowboy. So let's see. How would I want to go about this? Do I want to check every step? Or do I want to just do it in creates? Actually, if I'm doing this every step, every frame, that GUI random thing might not actually be too bad. Obviously, it's not going to be a two-sided die because then the enemies will be shooting, every 15 bullets a second or 30 bullets a second or whatever it is based on the frame rate, which is not good. I would rather have them shooting. Let's see. What are the odds of an enemy shooting? Probably on average, if there's 4 enemies on the screen, for example, and they're shooting every second, that'd be too many bullets. I should actually take care with this. The maximum number of bounces that a bullet can do before it disappears is about 30. So I guess that's not worth considering. What I should consider is just the number of seconds. So let's just say the average enemy is going to shoot every 5 seconds, for example. So let's just try that. And I do need to look at the frame rate. Which is in here. The frame rate is room speed. So that's going to give me my base. So this times whatever is going to mean seconds. So if I want, on average anyway, for the enemy to shoot every 5 seconds, that's probably what I want to do. 5 times the room speed. And if that's the case, I want them to shoot. And shooting means basically the same thing that it meant for the player, which is to spawn a bullet. And in this case, I need to keep track of the bad guy's direction. So let's see, set variable. Since they're facing kind of the default down to begin with, I'll just start with that. Yeah, I'll use EM for enemy. So EM direction. Default is just 4. Until they start moving around, there's not really much point in having a direction. But it should behave the exact same way it does for the player. And in this case, I think I won't use the dot stuff, because I want it to reference this enemy as opposed to just all, some random enemy. So all I have to do is get rid of all these player dots, and it should still work. I also need to remember to bring over that BLX offset. Make sure I don't have any player left. Okay, so that should just use the bad cowboy. I also need to remember BLX offset and Y offset to bring them over from player. And because the enemy, at least the bad cowboy enemy, is the exact same size as the player, I can get away with just the exact same variables. 6 to the right or left, 11 pixels up or down for where that bullet spawns. So I've got their direction set to 4, so theoretically they should only be shooting down, and they'll probably end up killing themselves because they'll shoot down and it'll bounce and they're not moving, so they'll just keep shooting themselves. As a start anyway, just to make sure this is working. We'll see what happens. Yeah, see, the enemies are randomly shooting bullets every couple of seconds. And basically killing themselves. But at least they're shooting, which is a good sign. So now I need to change this EM direction. Let's see. I need to change the EM direction to be facing the player. because if they're shooting, they should be shooting at the player. And, the easiest way to do this would be to just have them shooting, have the bullet go towards where the player is. But I don't want to give the bad guys, more flexibility than the player, because the player can only shoot in 8 directions based on which direction they're facing. So if the bad guys can shoot at all these kind of weird angles based on where the player is, yeah, that's going to mean the bad guys are more proficient gunmen, basically, than the player, and that's going to be kind of stressful for whoever's playing the game. You want the bad guys to behave at least like the player so that it's fair. You want your games to be fair, obviously. So to do that, I want to have the enemies, if the player's here, I want the enemies to be at least trying to face the player. So if the player's in this kind of range, then they should be facing up and to the right. Oh, I'm sorry, the camera's mirrored, so up and to the right. If they're straight up, then, or at least in this kind of range of being straight up, that little wedge, if you think of 360 degrees, dividing it by like 8, each of those little wedges, you want that to be the basic direction the enemy is facing when they shoot. So that's going to be dependent on the player, and that's going to require a little bit of scripting. So, I do need to take a break so I can drink some water and everything else, but I do have the enemies actually firing off bullet instances, which is a very, very good thing. It's actually, going much better than I expected. So when I come back, I'll have the enemy try to track the player and at least face in that direction, at least properly. So once that's set, then the enemies will be actually shooting at the player. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, for future enemies, they might want to face where the player is going. So if the player's, up here right now, but they're moving in such a way that in a couple of frames or seconds they'll be above the bad cowboy, then the bad cowboy wants to shoot up, anticipating they'll be going there. But that's logic that can come in when I make more advanced enemies. The simple one is just going to be shoot at the player. So let's jump on over to Trello. I do have the action shooting in here, but it needs to shoot at the player, so I will continue work on that once I come back from my break. I should be back in about a minute, so hang in with me. Once again, just run the game really quick to show you what we're doing. As you can see, the enemies are shooting, which is different from what we've had in previous episodes. They're shooting at random intervals, an average of, every 5 seconds or so they're shooting. And because right now I only have them facing down, they just shoot straight down, and because they don't move, they just shoot down, the bullet bounces up, and they kill themselves, basically. Which is obviously not what we want. We want them to be shooting at the player, and that's going to be the next step in what we do. So putting that away, jumping over to Trello, if I can get this shooting thing done quick, I might still be able to do the town win condition thing. Seems to be going all right, so I think I'll be able to get to that, but we'll see. So the next thing I need to do is have these bad cowboys actually shooting at the player, which means this EM direction needs to be influenced by where the player is. Now, let's see, there's a couple of ways I could go about this. I'm not sure if GameMaker actually has something in its internal scripting to automatically figure out where the player is in relation to the current object, the bad guy, basically. But it's no big deal. I could probably just do it based on just scripting. Because what we want to do is if the players, for example, if the enemy's here and the player's here, I want to have, that distance x to the player, the horizontal distance, the vertical distance, and I want to look at those to figure out where the enemy should be facing. So it's probably going to be a ratio, I would imagine. Let's see, if it's going to be a ratio, what would the ratio be? It's easy enough to say if the horizontal is 3, for example, and the vertical is 3, they're going to be, up and to the right, or down and to the right, I guess, using the GameMaker coordinates. But what happens if it's 2 and 3, or if it's 1 and 3, or if it's 1 and 0.5, etc. So we're going to have to divide that stuff out. So if GameMaker does have a convenient method for doing that stuff for me, that would be great, but I don't see how they would. So I probably will just have to figure out, using logic, which angle the player is in relation to the enemy. And that's going to be in here. In the future, the enemy is going to be facing the direction they move until they shoot. So I think I'm safe moving that scripting into here for determining the direction. Hopefully. Because movement's going to be different from shooting. They could be moving away from the player, for example, depending on whatever AI I implement for the enemies. They could be moving away from the player, which means they're facing away from the player, but then when they shoot, they could turn to face the player. So I probably do want it, when they shoot, to execute all of this player directional stuff. So the things I know are player.x, for example, and player.y, for example. The other things I know are this enemy, basically, so this bad cowboy instance, which is just x, because this code is executing within the bad cowboy object, and y. So taking these 4 variables, I'm going to have to figure out which of those 8 directions to face and shoot. So let's look at the directions. I've got... Actually, let's put this in Notepad. You know what? Let's just go with Paintbrush. So, I've got 0 up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Based on the bad guy being in the middle. These are the 8 directions they can shoot. So if the player is somewhere in here, I want the bad guy to face the 1 direction. If the player is in here, I want them to face the 2 direction, etc. So the difficulty is going to be in finding, whether they're in this, slice here. Theoretically, I'd imagine I have to use some geometry on this, but I'll probably fudge it a little bit. I may look that up later. So I don't want to spend too much time figuring out direction yet. So I'm just going to go with the generics. Let's see. So basically, if the horizontal direction and the vertical direction are more or less equal, they're going to be in a diagonal. If one is dominant, they're going to be, in one of these places. So let's see. Let's think about a really simple case, in fact, and then start worrying about fidgeting with ranges. So if player X, for example, is greater than X, then that means they're to the right. Well, let's see, it's mirrored on the camera, so to the right. I wonder how comments work in here. It looks like the standard C++ comments work here. So those are the 2 basic conditions. Obviously, if the player X is equal to X, that's going to be another condition. So those are my three possibilities. The player's either to the right of the enemy, to the left of the enemy, or neither to the right or the left, which means they're vertical. Those are the basic conditions anyway. Obviously I need to start fudging with those to make sure that the enemy can figure out how much to the right they are versus how much up and down they are. So let's see, if they're to the right, how do I want to do this? Do I want to have if statements inside of if statements, or do I want to set something in here? There's probably actually an easier way to do this in terms of logic, like depending on that 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 I have. I probably could have done it where it was like 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, something, something, or minus something, something, so that you could just use math to directly get the direction that you need. But I want to keep it simple for me, so I'm not going to do that. At least unless I can't get this working. So I'll just use a nested y statement. And just to make sure that the directions are working, I'm going to do the very, 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 very basic condition, which is not going to take into account those minor angles. Let's see, in GameMaker, a positive y is down, so this means it's below, I believe. So if the player is to the right and below, that means I wanted to use 0, 1, 2, 3. This is, again, this is not the final code, because this means that the enemy is always going to shoot at those diagonal directions, because the odds of the player being, exactly above or below, or not above or below, the odds of the enemy being on the exact same horizontal plane as the player are slim to none at best. So basically, if I continue this code as I'm doing it, the enemy is basically always going to be firing in diagonal directions. But that's fine for now. I just want to make sure that this basic code works. So don't be surprised if the enemy appears extremely stupid at the beginning. Because I will modify this later. In this case, the player is still to the right, but they're up, so that's 1. And if they just happen to be on the exact same horizontal plane, or yeah, the vertical plane, is if they happen to be on the exact same vertical level as the player, then that's going to be 2. And obviously the odds of coming into this else are extremely low. But I'll live with that for now. And in this case, the player's to the left, so if they're left and down, that's going to be 5. If they're left and up, that's going to be 7. Looking at this clock, left and up is 7. Left and down is 5. And if they're just left, that's going to be 6. Hopefully this else will never happen, but I'll leave it in for now. So in this case, player x is equal to x, which means the enemy is in the exact same horizontal position. Whether they're above or below, we don't know. But so if they are below, then that's 4. If they are above, that is 0. And hopefully they're not just right on top of the player, but in case they are, I'm just going to make this 4 for now. And let's get rid of all of these notes here. let's see what happens. Hopefully I don't get just an error. Well, at least I got into the game, which is good. Yeah. So now as you can see, the enemies are firing based on where the player is, which is nice. You know, at least at the moment it looks like they're doing alright because the player just happens to be in the middle. But, you know, if the player happens to be, you know, just a touch to the right, they're still going to fire off in a diagonal direction, which is not quite what we want. So we do have the enemies firing at the player. Obviously they're firing way too many bullets because you also have the player bullets to think about. And this is kind of nuts. Might be alright in the end, every 5 seconds, because the enemies aren't just going to be all right there to start. You know, they'll probably come onto the screen one at a time and start shooting at the player. So maybe 5 seconds is alright, because right now there's 4 enemies all at the same time. Which, you know, if the player wasn't shooting enemies and they let 4 get on the screen at the same time, they're basically hosed anyway. So that may actually be, you know, a good thing. 5 seconds. But one more thing I do want to do is, as it is now, there's this, you know, every 5 seconds, theoretically every 5 seconds, it comes into this shoot code. Now, I don't want the enemy to have different rules than the player, and the player right now can only shoot so many times. Yeah, I think it was like every half a second or something they can shoot, something like that, so that they're not firing off a stream of bullets. I don't want the enemy to have different rules than the player, so I need to give the enemy a cooldown as well. So I'm just going to do exactly what I did for the player in that case, which is there's this variable called PL shoot, which if it's 0 means it's okay for the player to shoot because they're not currently shooting. And I want to change that to EM shoot because it's the enemy. So as long as this is 0, the bad guy can shoot. But if they are shooting, I want to set it to 1 so that they don't shoot. Let's see, which of these should be on the outside? I would imagine the once every 5 seconds is going to come up less often than the case that they're already shooting. So I'm going to put the "are they shooting" question inside of that random thing. And I want to check if they're okay to shoot. So now this will only happen if they're okay to shoot. I do need to, let's see, I'm going to try to set an alarm here. Let's call it 1. Let's see, I only want the enemy to shoot maybe once every second or so. I don't want him to shoot any faster than that because it'll overwhelm the player. So I'm going to go with that. And just to remind myself that this means seconds, I'm going to just say times 1. So after, you know, if they shoot after this time elapse of, you know, however many frames per second it is, then it'll reset that enemy shoot to 0 so that they can shoot again. So I need to add an alarm event here. And all this is going to do is set EM shoot back to 0. And actually, I shouldn't have all this in begin step, should I? No, it might make sense to have it in begin step. Where do I have it for the player? Okay, the player shooting is inside of begin step, so I'll keep it that way for the enemy too, so that they're on the same playing field, basically. So now, I do theoretically have it where the enemy won't be able to constantly just fire off a stream of bullets. And they should be shooting relatively at the player. Hopefully. Let's see, make sure that works. again. That seems alright. So, later when I do have animation for these enemies, there's probably going to be a little bit of a delay when they pull out their gun and shoot or something, who knows. Because as it is now, obviously you don't see the enemy shooting, so you don't know these bullets are coming. It's just like they suddenly appear and they're flying at you, and, that's rather difficult. But let's check if this game is actually winnable at this point. Hopefully I don't get overwhelmed. If I just have two enemies on the screen at the same time, as long as I keep moving, they shouldn't be able to shoot me just right off the bat. And I have to remember that I can use my duck as well. So it's at least theoretically winnable, which is a good state to be in. But right now the enemies are kind of stupid because they're only firing off in diagonals, basically. So I need to go in and change that code that I mentioned before. So now I need to actually create a range. What is a good way to do this? Let's come up with a simple version. A test case, for example. Let's say the enemy... Actually, I should use paintbrush for this as well, because it's going to be easier to do this visually. So let's say enemy is here, and the player is here. So, for example, that vertical distance might be 3, and the horizontal distance might be 1. In this case, it probably scrapes on this side of the line, so I want the enemy to be shooting up, not up and to the right. Probably. Depending on where that line is, it's kind of hard to tell. So let's think about it in terms of angles first. So I've got eight angles, but actually it's not quite like this. It's going to be a little bit offset. It's actually more like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So if this is the bad guy in the middle here, if the player's in this area, then I want the bad guy to be shooting up and to the right. Okay, Jamorian dropped by. Hello, Jamorian. Thanks for stopping by. Did have a couple of people earlier in. After the break, I think it was just one other person. So right now, what I'm trying to figure out is shooting angles for this bad guy, just to show exactly where I'm at right now. I do have the enemies shooting at the player, basically at the player. But, even if the player is, let's see, but unfortunately the bad guys keep killing themselves, so it's hard to show this case. But with the logic I have right now, whether the Y direction is greater or less than the player and the X direction is greater than or less than the player is the thing that's determining where the enemy is facing and shooting. So for those, kind of subtle angles, like, if the player's here, for example, the bad guy is still shooting up and to the right when I want him to shoot up. So if this is a 360-degree circle divided by 8, I feel bad for using calc for this, but 45. Okay, so each of these is a 45-degree slice. So if the player is within this 45 degrees, I want the enemy to be shooting up. Now to determine whether the player's in that 45-degree angle, this is where my high school geometry vanishing on me, 20 years after the fact, is not going to help me with this. Let's see. I wonder if someone has just done this magical work for me, so I don't have to think, which would be great. Yeah, I'm fine with that so far. Well, I'm just going to have to take this guy on faith that this is what I want. Yeah, as this person mentions, it's not quite what I would want, but at least it does calculate the angle. Alright, well, let's look up GameMaker arctan 2. Was it 2? Let's make sure that I'm using the right one here. Yeah, just arctan, fine. To be honest, maybe calculating angles is going a little bit further than I actually need to do. And GameMaker actually looks like it does have a function that's going to do what I need it to do. Let's just look this up. If GameMaker has an internal function that does what I'm trying to do, then all the better, because then I don't even have to worry about whether what I'm doing is correct or not. Yeah, this is exactly what I'm experiencing right now. So let's see, EX, EY. Yep, I've got those variables. And in their example, again, if I did take this just as is, the problem is the enemy is going to be able to do things that the player can't, because as this is right now, the enemy would shoot exactly where the player is. But the enemy should only be shooting in one of 8 directions. So I do need to modify this a little bit. Yeah, this would be nice if this was what I was trying to do. Unfortunately, this returns a direction, and I'm not exactly sure what that means in GameMaker. So let's look that up. GameMaker Wiki. Okay, so this is what direction is. So in this case, 0 is right, 90 is up, 180 is left, 270 is down. So it's actually kind of, not only is it a different starting point, it's also going counterclockwise as opposed to my 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is going clockwise. Probably the easiest way to do this would be to fix my 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to look like this, because then it'd probably save me some steps later, but I don't really want to go in and fix that logic right now. So I'm just going to work with this. So let's keep track of that. So 0 is there, 90 is there, 180 is there, 270 is there. So in this case, I want the 45-degree angle kind of around 90. So for example, let's see, 90 minus 45 divided by 2. So I want everything from 67.5 to, you know, what's the other side? Plus 45 divided by 2. 112.5. So that would give me, you know, my 0. So this does look like exactly what I want to do. So thank you, Yo-Yo Games, for some good documentation. Unfortunately, I can't use the script logic that I have now to do that. Let's see, let's call this, what should I call this? EM shoot angle? EM shoot angle. And X and Y is fine, but I want this to be player X and player Y. And just so later when I'm debugging this, I know what this actually means. 0 is equal to right, 90 degrees is equal up, 180 is left, 270 is down. Just so I remember this stuff later. So theoretically, you know, if the player is directly to the right of the enemy, this EM shoot angle should hold 0. So now I just have to create logic that uses these angles. And let's see if GameMaker can actually use ranges. If not, I'm going to have to use ands. GameMaker logic range. Maybe it's not. If range. Okay, yeah, it just looks like. Yeah, because it would be nice if I could do this, but I don't think I can do that. Well, let's see if I can get away with this, because that would actually save me some steps. We'll find out real soon if this gives me an error anyway, so. Alright, now I need to calculate all of these things. So let's figure out shooting straight up first, which is actually what I just calculated, so 112.5. And let me just put a notepad in here. So 90, 45 divided by 2 is 22.5. So I need 22.5 slices. 90 minus 22.5 is 67.5. My math skills are obviously very embarrassing, and I do rely on the calculator a lot. So for those of you who can do this in your head, this will go a lot faster for you. So, and then I don't want variable, I want EM shoot angle. Okay. So in that case, the enemy should face up. The next range, in fact, I'm going to make, you know, there's this fine borderline. You know, what if it is exactly 112.5, or what if it is exactly 67.5? Doesn't really matter. Do you want the default behavior to kind of lean into shooting diagonals, or do you want the default behavior to be kind of leaning into shooting straight? I think diagonals look a little better, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep these as just, you know, less thans, and then I'm going to use less than equal on the diagonal directions, basically. So 112.5, actually I want to be going this way for logic's sake. So in this case, I'm going to go less than or equal. Oops. Shoot. Angle is less than or equal to 67.5, because I was about to do the exact same thing there. And I want to subtract 45 from this, so 22.5. And again, less than or equal to. So the enemy kind of leans towards shooting diagonals instead of straight. So in this case, the player's up and to the right, so that's 1. Let me tab this one over too. Now I'll get rid of all this logic. It wasn't wasted because at least it showed me that, you know, that stuff works. So the next one is going to be to the right. So 22.5 becomes the top border of that. So now I need the bottom border, which is going to be, I don't know if I can use negatives or not. I don't know. Let's not use negatives. What I mean is, you know, that straight right is 0, so that angle that's below it is either going to be minus 22.5 or it's going to be 360 minus 22.5. Which is 337.5. Let me double check that. 360 minus 45 divided by 2. Yeah, 337.5. But actually, in this case, that's going to be weird logically, because how can it be greater than 337 but less than 222.5? So I guess I do have to use minus. Hopefully it works. If not, I'm going to have to use ands and stuff like that. What is... Actually, I should look this up. You know, I'm kind of suspecting that the actual thing held in direction is always positive. But we'll see what happens, I guess. It might give me an error. My suspicion is that this EM shoot angle is always going to be storing a positive value. For calculation's sake, I think it's okay to, you know, subtract angles and things like that, but yeah, that's kind of tricky. We'll see. This would be a good place to have like a printf statement or something in here to actually show me what this EM shoot angle is holding. But since I don't have that luxury, I'm just going to have to see what happens in game. So moving on. Alright, that's 2, which is directly to the right. Now I want to the bottom right. In this case, at least, 360 minus 22.5, I should be able to get away with this. 337.5. And again, I want diagonals to take priority. And minus 45, so 292.5. In that case, shoot to the lower right. Next up, minus 45, 247.5. And 292.5. Save me a little bit of typing here. .247.5, and this is going to be another diagonal direction. Let's change that 5 before I forget. And subtract 45 again, 202.5. In this case, I want to copy this one. Let's see if my math adds up. We'll find out soon enough, I guess. Yeah, it looks okay. Let me do that one more time. 2.5 minus 45. Okay, 157.5. I think I'm okay. Math looks alright. This one is another diagonal. This is up and to the left, which is that final one, which is 7. So 157.5, and again minus 45, 112.5. Yep, everything added up. Because if I did this wrong, this, I do need to change this first. This equals this, which is fine, which means I have every angle covered with this. The only thing that's fishy right now is this. This thing is fishy. So this direction, the shooting right direction, is the one that's kind of fishy because it depends on what this contains. I wonder if there's a simple message box function in GameMaker, because I want to see what's being held in that. Let's see. GameMaker variable message box? I don't know. I don't know if I want to go that far. Let's just say variable debug display. Yeah, error reporting's fine. Checking performance, that's not what I'm worried about, so that's not quite it. Alright, well, since that's not coming right off the bat, I guess we'll see what happens when the player stands to the right of the enemy. You know, if they don't shoot right, then there's definitely a problem. You know, just to be safe, let's do this. It's going to create one thing that the logic just never ever goes into, because only one of these can be right. But the other possibility that I could do is going past 360. 382.5. So depending on what GameMaker does with their directions, one of these should work at least. It's either going to calculate this properly or it's going to calculate this properly. If it calculates neither one of them properly, then I don't know what's going on, because a variable can only store, you know, one value, so it's either going to be positive or it's going to be something else. So that should, all of this code should at least change the enemy direction to face the player better than the stuff I had going. But let's see what happens. Unfortunately, they keep shooting themselves, so that's no good. Something tells me that is not working at all. So I do need to see what's going on in that variable, because they're now always shooting up, regardless of where the player is. Which basically means EM shoot angle is always this. Which is really weird, because the default should be 4 actually. But for some reason the enemy is always shooting up, so I'm really, really curious about what is going into this. I should probably look at what other people are doing with it, because GameMaker's documentation wasn't quite enough to get me what I needed. Now that's something totally different. Okay, calculating target direction. The target's definitely on the right. That's cool. This is actually slowly rotating something towards the target, which is making this a little more complicated than what I need. So what I need is this, basically. And that should be giving me the angle properly. Nah, actually, maybe it would just be simpler to look up how to debug variables. Print variable. Jim Orion mentions another option is dividing the calculated angle value by whatever number, then taking the integer to leave values of, 1 to 8 for directions, or 0 to 7 or whatever. Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. I'll keep that in mind. But I do want to figure out what value is actually going into this calculation here. Let's just draw it kind of just in a random location here. Hopefully this works. Unfortunately, that is not drawing anything anywhere, so that's no good. Shoot angle. Why is it not drawing that text in the right place? Now, what was that person doing? Plus string variable. Maybe that's what the problem was. I have to do this. We'll see. Unfortunately, it's going to draw a ton of those values on top of each other. If it worked, but it doesn't work, so that's that. What is going on here? Always shooting up. I want to know what's in that variable, but I cannot seem to get out of it what is in that variable. Maybe I do have to put it in a draw step or something. Let's see, draw. Okay. Give me some tooltips here. Draw self, draw sprite, draw text. Actually, I don't think that even works, so let's just go with the script. And what was that? Shoot angle. Now let's pull it out of here. Hopefully that's all I needed to do. Now it doesn't know what EM shoot angle is because it's inside of that source. Unfortunate to have to do all this extra stuff to debug, but yeah, I'll just make the default 90, I guess. Now I don't have any enemies. Well, they're definitely shooting at different angles. It appears that angle variable is working. So what I'm guessing, actually, is that that whole like range thing is just not working in script. So whoever posted that on the forum was probably wrong about that stuff. I think that's the big problem that I'm having, actually. The angle seems to be working just fine. I think it's this stuff. It's this stuff, I think, that's having the problem. So let's change these out to ands. And Jimorian mentions, yeah, what you want is a formula that reduces the value to a range of 0 to 7, then multiply that by 45 to feed to your shoot direction. That way you're always in bounds. Yeah, exactly. In this game, like I mentioned, I don't want the enemy to shoot exactly where the player is, so in reality, I don't even want to use that angle, really. For shooting, I just want to use it for calculating what direction the enemy should be facing when they shoot. Because, like the player, the enemy should only be shooting in one of 8 directions, as opposed to, 360 degrees worth. Because the player can't do that, so, it wouldn't be fair if the enemy was a better gunman than the player. EM shoot angle is greater than that. And less than that. Greater than that. And less than that. Again, greater than that. Less than or equal to that. Greater than or equal to. Make sure I don't mess that up, because otherwise there'll be an angle where the enemy can't shoot the player. That wouldn't be very good. Greater than that. Less than that. And shoot. For all I know, this actually won't actually fix anything, but I suspect because when I was using that debug thing to print the angle, things other than 90 degrees were coming up, so the EM shoot angle was storing a proper angle, but the if statements weren't triggering properly, so I suspect it's because I was using that range thing, which probably doesn't work the way I expected it to. And make sure I don't forget my equal in there. Okay. So, let's see. Everything looks okay. Let's see what happens with this. I Probably have one too many symbols in there. Yeah, that's why. Too many parentheses. Alright, let's see what happens now. Alright, there we go. Now the enemy is quite deadly because they're shooting... Let's see. Killed the enemy on me. Alright, let's try again. Yeah. Okay. It works. Thankfully. Our player is going to have a lot of trouble dodging these bullets because they are coming out fast and furious, but what is now happening is if the player just happens to be to the right of the enemy, but just, you know, a little bit up or a little bit down, the enemy's going to shoot right. If the player just happens to be up here, they're going to shoot diagonally. You know, the enemy is going to choose one of 8 directions based on where the player is. Let me just make sure that, like, it works to the left as well. Yeah, okay. So the enemies are shooting left at the player as well. And it favors the diagonal as expected, because diagonals look cooler, and especially with the pinball mechanic, you know, with shooting straight, it just kind of bounces back, but if it's at an angle, it starts, you know, kind of like a pool table or something. It looks cooler, so I want the default to be diagonals. So I do have that working, thankfully. And thank you for sticking with me on that one. Jim Orion mentions, how is angle to player being calculated? Angle to player is being calculated through a GameMaker function. Let's see. Well, let's go back to our paint program here. GameMaker is using that function called point direction. It's a GameMaker function. What it's doing is it's taking the object you want to calculate from and the object you want to calculate to, and returning an angle based on that. So, you know, all that stuff that I looked up about, you know, using tangents, blah, 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 is all being done inside of point direction for me, thanks to GameMaker. And what that's returning is this stuff here. So if the player XY is just on a straight line to the right of the enemy, well, let's see, it's mirrored, so if they're just, you know, on that straight line, it's going to return 0. If they're above the enemy, it's going to return 90 degrees, and if they're, you know, somewhere in between, it's going to return, you know, like, say, for example, 45 degrees or 47 degrees or 60 degrees, etc. And it's just going to, you know, return that angle anywhere from 0 to 359. And so what I'm doing is taking that angle, and if that slice equals this over here, this 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that I had set up from the beginning, if the angle falls in that slice, then all of those angles get kind of boiled down to just one number, which is a direction, one of 8 directions for the enemy. Also, Jamorian mentions, so if the enemy calculates it's 47 degrees, you want it to shoot at 45. Yes, that's exactly it. Kind of default to the closest angle. So that task is done. The bad cowboys are now shooting at the player, which is great. It did take the whole 2 hours, so I will save this for next episode, actually. This shouldn't actually take very long. I just have to keep track of how many enemies are on the screen, and when that gets to 0, or actually not how many enemies are on the screen, but how many enemies are going to be in the level. And once that number gets to 0, you know, give the player congratulations, or, you know, at the end of the day, it's going to be moved to the next stage, but obviously more stages is something that comes later after we get the enemies moving and everything else. Which does remind me that I do want a more complicated enemy as well. So I want a bad cowboy. Let's just call it bad cowboy. And let's see, this might be I don't know. We'll see how complicated this is, but let's give it an hour, just for the sake of giving me a little bit of freedom to do this. What I want this bad cowboy to be doing, and this is not episode 7, this is in the future. probably after the bad cowboys can dodge. Actually, maybe that is one of the things the bad cowboy can do. Right now, the enemy takes where the player is and shoots in that direction, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I probably want enemies that are smarter than that as well. You know, I want dumb enemies too, because I want the player to have fun shooting dumb enemies, but I also want smarter enemies. You know, probably have to change up the graphics so the player knows this enemy is a little different from the other ones. You know, like Pac-Man, for example, you know, you've got the red ghost or something that I think just comes straight for the player. You've got another ghost that I don't remember which of the 4 ghosts it is, but one of the ghosts calculates where the player's going and tries to head them off at the pass, basically. And, you know, the fun of Pac-Man is the fact that you have both of these ghosts. So, you know, if all the ghosts were just chasing where you were, you know, they just join, you know, they create a giant conga line behind Pac-Man, and that's no fun. But you have some ghosts that are random. Let's see, you have a ghost that's random, you have a ghost that's trying to anticipate where you're going to cut you off, you have a ghost that's chasing where you are at this moment, and then you have another ghost that does something else. Don't remember what that one was. But it's that variation of those 4 ghosts that makes it seem like the ghosts are kind of trying to box you in, basically. Same with the enemies in this game. I want dumb enemies that just shoot at where you were, so it forces you to keep moving. And I also want enemies that shoot at where you're going, so that you have to be careful about just, you know, circling around the screen or whatever to stay safe. You actually have to kind of, you know, see, all right, this is the kind of enemy that shoots where I'm going, so if I see one of those, maybe I want to kill that first because that's a harder one to dodge. It creates a little more, you know, rock, paper, scissors action in the game. So that's what that batter cowboy is. And just to keep a note on that, that's what I want the batter cowboy to do. But until we get just the basic, dull, stupid bad cowboy moving properly, you know, that can come later. For now, obviously, the bad cowboys they just stand there and shoot, which is no good. They need to start moving around as well. Once I get them moving, then I can finally, you know, create enemy patterns, which means, you know, they're not just appearing on the screen with the player at the start, because that's extremely difficult, as you can see. If they're already surrounding the player and shooting all at once, then yeah, that's really hard to dodge and shoot them, etc. But what will happen in the end is that they'll come, you know, streaming onto the screen one at a time or whatever. And, you know, if you let them go without shooting them, then they have more chances to shoot you. But because of that pinball mechanic, you can get more points if you have a bullet going around the screen long before it hits them. It's just going to be one of those risk-reward systems. If your goal is just to beat the game, obviously the best strategy is to shoot the enemies as soon as they appear on the screen. If your goal is to get a high score, the goal is going to be to try to shoot the bullet so that it doesn't hit enemies until the last possible second, while you dodge around and take your chances. That's going to be the basic gameplay. Getting closer to it. So that was episode 7. You know, I estimated 2 hours. It did take the whole show. But now the game is actually a game. You actually do have to dodge enemy fire, and you have to kill them. So that's great. And I'll move that over. So for those of you who are looking Trello up later, you can see all this stuff. And let's go ahead and make one for episode 8, which is next week. And drag that over. As the episodes start stacking up, this dragging process is going to take quite a bit of time in Trello. So for episode 8, that town level, the win condition, basically, you know, give the player a winning screen when they kill all the enemies. And something tells me getting the bad cowboys moving around the screen is actually much bigger than this. So I'm going to actually add an hour to that. Because if I had that much trouble getting them to shoot at the player, getting them to move around the screen and have like some sort of artificial intelligence where they're dodging objects and things like that, it's going to be that's going to be fun to do. So I imagine that's going to be at least 2.5 hours, but I want to get that win condition in first, so I'll just make that my first task. And if I have to stop this partway through the next episode and continue in episode 9, that's just what I'm going to have to do. But, you know, I will look a little of that stuff up, because I think GameMaker has something called a motion map or something where it automatically, if you give the enemy a destination, it will try to come up with a path that doesn't run into objects on the way. So if I can successfully use that, this might not be that bad. If I can't use that, then I'm going to have to get really complicated with enemy AI, which means I have to calculate where the player is, face in that direction. If there's a collision object on the way, then they have to calculate a different direction to get around that, and then look at the player and all that stuff. That's going to be very, very complicated to do if I have to do that myself. But hopefully GameMaker does pull the slack for me there. But that's going to be next week. So let's jump out of GameMaker. Let's make sure I save all that because I don't want it to disappear on me. Get rid of that. Get rid of my calculator handy thing. Don't think I need that. And let's see, jump away from my desktop. Thank you everyone for watching. Jamorian mentioned for that that function, the point direction function, that it's handy. Yes, it is a very handy function. Thank you for stopping by, everyone. For the people in the chat, Rooney Clip at the beginning who stopped by, after a couple of episodes, and Jamorian for stopping by in the latter half. Thank you guys for showing up and watching the show. For those of you who are watching this on YouTube later, you can come by anytime you want. Twitch TV Blue Tengu is where I do this live. I do it my Saturday 8 a.m. in Japan, which translates to 4 p.m. Fridays, 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight, 5 Mountain, 6 Central, 7 Eastern. If you're in the UK, it translates to midnight, basically Friday midnight, Saturday midnight, depending on how you think about it. If you're in Japan with me, obviously it's just 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. If I do this for about 2 hours every week on Saturday. If you're in Australia, you're a little bit more east of Japan, so that's about 9 to, I think, 10:30, 11, depending on where you live in Australia. And if you're in New Zealand, it's noon, I believe, on Saturday. So if you do have time and you like Twitch, come on by, see it live. You can chat with me and, help me if you want to. Or you can just, ask questions if you want to as well. And if you're watching this on YouTube, which is youtube.com Blue Tengu Studio, all the episodes are archived there. You can also see everything that we're doing over at www.bluetengu.com. And I do update Twitter, which is btengu. I also am on Facebook. Blue Tengu Studio is the username for there. So whichever one you like, definitely subscribe, like, follow, do whatever you can if you do like what we're doing. And hopefully next week I will get the enemies moving. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.